Episode 75, The Murders at Corpsewood Manor. Hey y'all, I'm Heather, and this is Poisoned Appalachia, the dark side of Appalachia. As always, thank you for listening. It's so great to be back. Y'all started up with me again like I never left, and I cannot tell you how much I appreciate that. It's been amazing. I hope that you enjoyed last week's episode on the Buffalo Creek disaster. I thought that was a pretty good one. I mean, how many times are these coal companies going to show us how truly soulless they really are? It's ridiculous. Today's case, though, is true crime, kind of switching up gears a little bit. It's a sad story showing the true nature of some people, unfortunately. This episode is about the murder of Dr. Charles Lee Scudder and Joseph Odom in Chattanooga County, Georgia, at their residence, Corpsewood Manor, in 1982. They had moved to Georgia fairly recently to start a new life. Unfortunately, people are going to people, and they were not looked at as what was considered normal in Appalachian, Georgia in the 1980s. Let's find out a bit about Dr. Scudder and Joseph Odom. Dr. Charles Morrison Scudder was born on October 6, 1926, in Wauwatosa, Wisconsin, to Charles Morrison Scudder and Eleanor Edith Lee. From an early age, he displayed remarkable intelligence and an insatiable curiosity. While attending Oberlin College in the 1940s, he studied zoology, languages, music, drama, and art, even starring in the school's production of Candida. Although his interests were broad, science ultimately became his life's calling. On September 10, 1946, Scudder married fellow Oberlin student Helen Kilbourne Hazlett. Their marriage was short-lived and ended in divorce. In the early 1950s, he married Bortai Bunting, the daughter of renowned British modernist poet Basil Bunting. Together they had 4 sons, Saul, Gideon, Fenris, and Ahab. That marriage also ended, leaving Scudder to raise his children while balancing an increasingly demanding academic career. After earning his degrees in zoology, languages, chemistry, and eventually a PhD in pharmacology from Loyola University and Strich's School of Medicine, Scudder quickly established himself as a respected researcher and educator. He became an associate professor of pharmacology and served as an associate director of Loyola's Institute for Mind, Drugs, and Behavior, where he conducted research involving psychoactive and hallucinogenic drugs under the mentorship of Dr. Alexander Karksmar. Brilliant but unconventional, Scudder developed a reputation as something of a renegade within the academic community. Friends and colleagues remembered him as an eccentric, creative, and fiercely independent. He occasionally dyed his hair bright purple or red. He kept the pet monkey painted, played the harp. He played the harp well enough to perform at the Chicago Symphony, so that's pretty good. And he filled his sprawling West Adams Street mansion with elaborate Baroque furnishings rescued from the liquidation of Chicago's historic Balaban and Katz Theater. He believed deeply in the interconnectedness of the universe and published scientific work exploring those ideas. In 1959, Scudder hired Joseph "Joey" Odom, a man 12 years his junior, to help care for his 4 young sons. Odom, who had only had a 5th grade education, soon became far more than an employee. Over the years, he became Scudder's cook, housekeeper, closest friend, and lifelong companion. Scudder later wrote that despite his many academic degrees, Joey had taught him more about life than any university ever could. By the 1970s, however, Scudder had grown increasingly disillusioned. He complained that his students lacked curiosity, and the university politics had become petty and exhausting. His second marriage had ended, his sons were grown and beginning lives of their own. He was devastated by the death of his youngest son Ahab in 1970. With only him and Joey remaining in the aging Chicago mansion, Scudder began dreaming of a simpler life far from the city. The opportunity came in 1976 after receiving a modest inheritance following his mother's death. Determined to leave academia behind, Scudder searched throughout the southeastern United States for the perfect piece of land. He wanted somewhere with 4 distinct seasons, abundant forests, clean water, and above all, isolation. Which, actually, that sounds nice. Although, I could do with just fall as the seasons go, but that's just me. On December 17th, 1975, he purchased 40 acres in the mountains of Chattanooga County, Georgia, bordering on the Chattahoochee National Forest. After making the 10-hour drive to inspect the property, he fell in love with its beauty, describing hummingbirds, whippoorwills, butterflies, towering oaks, fungi, bobcats, and rolling mountain woodlands. So on his 50th birthday, October 6, 1976, Scudder celebrated by resigning from Loyola University. He auctioned nearly everything he owned, including the mansion's treasured antiques, and gave away anything requiring electricity. He intended to live completely off the grid. He kept a handful of possessions, including his beloved golden harp. By January 1977, Scudder, Joey Odom, and their 2 English mastiffs arrived in the mountains of northwest Georgia during a brutal winter storm. They slept their first night in their car and then in a tent, and then the 2 men began constructing what would become Corpsewood Manor, almost entirely by hand. They were armed with little more than a chainsaw, a concrete mixer, and determination. They cleared the land, dug a well, excavated the foundation, and designed a unique stone home unlike anything else in rural Georgia. Scudder named the property Corpsewood Manor, inspired by the skeletal appearance of the leafless trees that surrounded the mountain when they first arrived. The unusual name reflected his dark sense of humor rather than any sinister purpose. The construction of the manor and his philosophy of self-sufficient living were later chronicled by Scudder himself in a 1981 Mother Earth News article. I don't know if y'all ever read Mother Earth News magazine, but when I was a teenager growing up, I loved that magazine for some reason. I was just a hippie girl and wanted to grow up living life off the grid and all that, but I mean, I still, I guess, wouldn't mind it as much, but I like the comforts of electricity, so I think I don't think I would do too good with that kind of life right now. But let's get back to our story. Although Corpsewood Manor would later become surrounded by rumors of witchcraft, devil worship, and the occult, the reality was far more nuanced. Scudder had a lifelong fascination with philosophy, symbolism, and comparative religion. He corresponded with a wide variety of individuals, including Anton LaVey, founder of the Church of Satan, and records confirm that he became a member of LaVey's Church of Satan in 1980. Friends recalled that when asked about religion, Scudder often replied simply, "I'm a Satanist." As practiced by the Church of Satan, they do not worship a deity, but instead worship oneself. The devil is used as a symbol of humankind's inner desires. A few months before their impending murders, Scudder had a self-portrait painted, bound with duct tape over his mouth, and what looked like 5 bullet holes in his head, which many speculate was a premonition of his own death. However, those who know him well described his beliefs less as a devil worshipper and more as a philosophical atheism, rooted in LaVey and Satanism's emphasis on personal freedom, skepticism, and self-determination, rather than belief in a literal supernatural devil. His home featured Baphomet and occult symbolism, but his library reflected a lifelong curiosity about science, philosophy, history, and the mysteries of human belief. Beneath the Gothic aesthetics was a scientist who rejected organized religion and sought to live according to his own principles. For Scudder, Corpsewood Manor represented freedom, the chance to leave behind academic politics, embrace nature, and build a life of simplicity alongside the man he considered his closest companion. Tragically, that dream would come to a violent end just a few years later, transforming Corpsewood Manor from a secluded mountain sanctuary into one of Appalachia's most infamous murder scenes. Compared to Dr. Charles Scudder, relatively little has been written about Joseph Joey Odom. While Scudder left behind his scientific publications, personal writings, and interviews, Joey remains a far more elusive figure. Yet those who knew him described him as the heart of Corpsewood Manor, a gifted cook, loyal companion, and a man who embraced a simpler way of life. Joseph Odom was born in Chicago, Illinois to Connie Odom, a Georgia native, and Mary Condella Odom, whose family traced its roots to Louisiana and Italy. His maternal grandparents were Joseph Condella, an Italian immigrant, and Florence Cluarte Condella of Louisiana. Joey's parents had moved to North Chicago from Georgia shortly before his birth as part of the broader migration of Southerners seeking work in industrial Midwest. Unlike Scudder, whose life revolved around universities and scientific research, Joey's formal education ended after the 5th grade. At some point during his younger years, he also experienced legal troubles, though few details have survived. Despite his limited schooling, Scudder believed Joey possessed a wisdom that could not be taught in classrooms. He later wrote, He learned far more about the world than I have with all my degrees, and somewhere along the line he developed a talent for whipping up meals fit for a king. In 1959, Joey was hired to care for Scudder's 4 young sons while also serving as a cook and housekeeper in the family's aging mansion in Chicago's West Adams Street. Over time, the employer-employee relationship evolved into a deep friendship and eventually a lifelong romantic partnership. For nearly 2 decades, the two men shared a home, caring for Scudder's children and pursuing a life filled with music, art, books, and lively conversation. Joey also experienced profound personal loss during those years. His mother, Mary Odom, died in Chicago on December 1st, 1966. Less than a half a year later, tragedy struck again when his father, Conrad, was brutally assaulted during a mugging in May of 1967. Although he initially survived the attack, complications from a blood clot led to his death following surgery on September 11, 1967. By the mid-70s, Joey and Scudder had grown weary of life in Chicago. While Scudder sought an escape from epidemic politics, Joey longed for something simpler. He dreamed of cooking on a wood-burning stove and living without dependence on modern conveniences. According to friends and family, he disliked unnecessary electricity so much that he unplugged appliances when they were not in use, sometimes tying the cords in knots as if to choke them. Together, the two men searched for land throughout the southeastern United States before purchasing 40 secluded acres in Chattooga, Georgia. I keep saying Chattanooga, but it's Chattooga County, Georgia. There they built Corpsewood Manor almost entirely by hand. Constructed from brick and stone, the unusual round home featured no electricity or public utilities. It was furnished with Renaissance antiques, rescued from Chicago, stained glass artwork, sculptures, books on philosophy and occult, and anatomical specimens left over from Scudder's years at Loyola University. A pink gargoyle overlooked the property, while the surrounding forest provided much of what the pair needed to live. Although visitors often remembered their unusual architecture and Gothic decorations, many left talking about Joey's hospitality instead. Joey became known throughout the area as an exceptional cook, preparing elaborate meals on simple wood stove for neighbors. And his warmth often balanced Scudder's intellectual intensity, making visitors feel welcome despite the manor's intimidating appearance. In 1977, only months after settling into Georgia, Joey was involved in a serious automobile accident on the steep mountain leading to Corpsewood Manor. The crash left him severely injured and bedridden for several months. Although he eventually recovered enough to resume his daily life, friends said he never really regained his full health. Following Joey's murder in 1982, friends and family described him as a practicing Catholic, despite his long relationship with Scudder. His sister Mary often later acknowledged both his faith and homosexuality, offering a more complete picture of a man whose identity was often reduced to rumor after his death. Scudder's will reflected the death of their relationship. Rather than leaving his estate to the surviving children, Scudder wrote, "It is my intention by this will to provide for my good friend Joseph Odom to the exclusion of all other persons." The wording sparked legal disputes among surviving family members after both men were killed. Joseph Odom was survived by his 3 sisters, Catherine Margaret, Mary Loretta, and Cora May. On January 19, 1983, his ashes were scattered in the Rose Garden at Corpsewood Manor, the mountain sanctuary he had helped build with his own hands. Though history often remembers Corpsewood Manor through the lens of its tragic ending, Joey Odom's story is equally one of devotion, resilience, and the pursuit of a quieter life. He may not have held any advanced degrees or published scientific papers, but those who knew him remembered a man whose generosity, culinary talent, and steadfast companionship helped transform an isolated mountain into a home. Alright, so let's get into this a little bit more about the manor. On October 6, 1976, Charles Scudder turned 50 years old. But instead of celebrating a party, he celebrated by walking away from the life he'd spent decades building. He resigned from Loyola University, sold his Chicago mansion, auctioned off his beloved antiques, and gave away anything that required electricity. The only things he carried with him were the essentials, including his golden harp. Scudder and Joey were leaving behind the city, academia, and a world that no longer felt like home. They weren't looking for comfort, they were looking for isolation. Their destination was 40 acres of a remote mountain wilderness in Chattooga County, Georgia. In the winter of 1977, Scudder, Odom, and their 2 English mastiffs arrived in the mountains after driving through a brutal snowstorm. I mentioned this earlier, but their first nights were spent sleeping in their vehicle and then in a tent as snow covered the unfamiliar land around them. But they stayed. Armed with little more than determination, hand tools, and a vision, the men began carving a home out of the wilderness. They cleared the land, dug a well, built drainage systems, and laid thousands of bricks by hand. Eventually, their dream began to take shape, a castle hidden in the Appalachian foothills. They named it Corpsewood Manor. The name comes from the eerie landscape surrounding their property. When they first arrived, the trees stood so bare and twisted, looking almost lifeless against the mountain sky. To Scudder, it was not a warning, it was inspiration. The manor was unlike anything else in the area, built with approximately 45,000 bricks. The structure contained no square corners, giving it a medieval appearance. Years later, one investigator described the construction as using medieval building techniques. Above the entrance stood a pink concrete gargoyle. The windows were filled with unusual stained glass designs, all designed by Scudder, including skull imagery and Baphomet. 4 chimneys rose from the roof, each decorated with pentagrams. Inside were Renaissance-style furnishings, antique pieces from Scudder's Chicago mansion, dark artwork, books on philosophy and the occult, and an atmosphere that felt more like a forgotten European castle than a home in rural Georgia. But Corpsewood Manor was more than just a strange house. It was a statement. Scudder had always been fascinated by symbolism, philosophy, and the darker corners of human belief. He eventually became an official member of Anton LaVey's Church of Satan. Although the organization did not believe in its literal devil, instead LaVeyan Satanism centered on around atheism, individualism, and personal freedom. Still, in the late 1970s and early 1980s, those distinctions did not matter much to outsiders. A strange man with a castle, occult decorations, a black Jeep with pentagram painted on the side, and a reputation for unconventional beliefs was enough to make people suspicious. The rumors began almost immediately. Locals drove up the winding mountain road to see the mysterious new residence. At the entrance to the property, a sign warned, "Beware of the Thing." Some believed it was a joke inspired by the Addams Family. Others saw a proof of something darker was happening behind the trees. Stories spread of strange rituals, robed figures in the woods, and a hidden world inside the mountain manor. But its reality was more complicated. Scudder and Odom actually tried to become part of the community. They invited neighbors to dinner, shared their homemade wine, and welcomed visitors to their unusual home. Joey Odom became known for his incredible cooking, preparing elaborate meals on a simple wood-burning stove. Scudder entertained guests with conversation, music, and sometimes performances on his golden harp. For some visitors, Corpsewood Manor was magical. One local described a candlelit dinner there as something out of a fantasy, complete with a 5-course meal and wine served in silver goblets. But it wasn't just the manor itself that fueled gossip. Behind the house stood a 3-story structure known as the Chicken House. The first floor housed chickens and supplies. The second floor stored canned goods. But the third floor became known as the source of some of the darkest rumors surrounding Corpsewood. It was called the Pink Room. It was accessible only by a ladder, and the small room contained pink curtains, mattresses, candles, and personal items. According to those familiar with the property, it was a private space where consenting adults gathered, often sharing wine, conversation, and intimacy away from the judgment of the outside world. To some visitors, it represented freedom. To others, it became evidence of everything they feared. You have to remember, by the 1980s, America was in the middle of what would be called the Satanic Panic. Across the county, rumors about hidden cults, satanic rituals, and occult influence spread through communities. Movies, books, and news stories fueled public fear. In that environment, 2 gay men living in a remote mountain castle surrounded by occult imagery and rumors of unconventional gatherings became easy targets. To outsiders, Corpsewood Manor looked like a place where something sinister must be happening. To those who actually knew Scudder and Odom, it was something different. It was a home, a place built brick by brick by 2 men searching for peace, independence, and a life away from the noise of the world. But deep in the mountains of North Georgia, the rumors continued to grow, and eventually the legend of Corpsewood Manor would become far more darker than anyone could have imagined. For nearly 5 years, Charles Scudder and Joseph Odom had lived quietly on Taylor's Ridge. They welcomed hunters on their property, invited strangers to dinner, poured glasses of homemade wine, and asked for little in return except the solitude they'd come to the mountains to find. One of these hunters was a 17-year-old named Kenneth Avery Brock. Scudder gave Brock permission to hunt the property, and over time the young man became a regular visitor to Corpsewood Manor. But what Brock saw wasn't reality. He saw a castle, he saw antiques, he saw strange symbols and rumors of devil worship, and he convinced himself that the two men living on the mountain must be hiding a fortune. In truth, Scudder and Odom had spent nearly everything they owned building Corpsewood Manor. They were living simply, surviving on only a few $100s a month. By late 1982, Brock had shared his fantasy with 32-year-old Samuel Tony West. Together, they convinced themselves that the queer devil worshippers, their words, were rich and that no one would care what happened to them. On the night of December 12, 1982, Brock and West drove to Corpsewood Manor with two unsuspecting teenagers who believed they were simply going for a ride. Before they arrived, the group had been huffing a homemade inhalant known locally as Toodaloo. It was a dangerous mixture of paint thinner, glue, and alcohol. Like, how did they even survive that? But, like he had so many times before, Charles Scudder welcomed them inside. The guests climbed to the pink room above the chicken house, sharing homemade wine, while Joey Odom remained in the kitchen, cleaning up after supper. It would be the last act of hospitality either man would ever offer. Claiming he needed more Toodaloo, Brock stepped outside and retrieved a .22 rifle from his vehicle instead. When he returned carrying the gun, Scudder reportedly laughed and jokingly said, "Bang, bang." Seconds later, he was bound, threatened with a knife, and forced toward the house while Brock demanded to know where the money was hidden. There was no fortune, only Joey. Brock entered the kitchen and shot Joseph Odom multiple times, killing him where he stood. He also killed the couple's two beloved English Mastiffs. Which, if any of you have been listening to my podcast, you all know I'm an animal lover, and that is almost the worst part to me. But the whole situation is tragic. Scudder was dragged into the house and forced to look upon the body of the man he had spent more than 20 years building life with. His captors demanded what didn't exist. They beat him, they ransacked the home, and when Scudder tried to move toward Joey one final time, he was shot repeatedly. According to testimony, his final words were, "I asked for this." Whether those words reflected regret and trusting the wrong people or something else entirely, no one ever really will know. The killers tore through Corpsewood Manor, searching for riches they believed had to be there. Instead, they found very little. A handful of coins, some jewelry, silver candlesticks, a ceremonial dagger. They even tried to steal Scudder's treasured harp, but abandoned it when they realized it was too large to fit inside the Jeep. 2 days later, family friend Raymond Williams arrived at Corpsewood to deliver news of another friend's death. Instead, he discovered bullet holes in the door and realized something was terribly wrong. The murder of Charles Scudder and Joseph Odom quickly became national news. Unfortunately, not because of the brutality. Newspapers fixated on something else. They repeatedly described the victims as homosexual devil worshippers. The headlines dwelled on skulls, occult books, pornography, and Satanism far more than they mourned two humans whose only real crime was living life differently. The country was in the grip of satanic panic, as I mentioned, and Corpsewood Manor became one of its most infamous symbols. Meanwhile, Brock and West fled west in Scudder's black Jeep. During their escape, they murdered Navy Lieutenant Kirby Phillips in Mississippi while attempting to steal his car. They eventually separated. Within days, both men were in custody. Kenneth Avery Brock pleaded guilty and received 3 consecutive life sentences. Tony West was convicted of murder and initially sentenced to death before receiving life imprisonment after a retrial. Both reportedly claimed they believed Scudder had hidden riches and later attempted to justify the murders with sensational stories about drugs and Satanism. These claims that the investigators were unable to substantiate. Forensic testing found no evidence that the wine served at Corpsewood contained anything other than wine. In the years since, the legend of Corpsewood Manor has often become buried beneath stories of Satanism, sex, and the occult. But strip away the rumors, and another story remains. 2 men built a home with their own hands on a lonely Appalachian mountainside because they believed they had finally found peace. Instead, fear, greed, and prejudice climbed the mountain before they could ever leave it. This is such a sad story to me. They just wanted to live life in peace and be happy, but they didn't get a happy ending. People just suck sometimes. After all these years, I feel like nothing's changed all that much. But there's always hope that things will get better. Anyhow, that's about it for today's episode. As always, thank you for listening. You can follow me on social media under Poisoned Appalachia. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, Threads, TikTok, and YouTube. If you could, on the podcast platform you listen to, could you please like and rate me and share me, please? Let everyone know about my podcast. Let's get the word out. Thanks, y'all, and have a great week.